Hi, I'm Rhiannon. At a fancy family dinner, my mother stood up, looked me dead in the eye, and screamed, "You're just the adopted one. Pay the $7,500 bill." The whole table clapped, laughed, like I was garbage. They thought they broke me. But what they didn't see was the storm I'd kept quiet for years, and just minutes later, it would wash away everything they thought they owned. Before we dive in, what time are you watching this and where from? Drop it in the comments. Let's begin. I walked into the restaurant with a quiet kind of hope, the kind you barely let yourself feel because you know it's been crushed before. The steakhouse smelled of charred meat and expensive wine. Mahogany walls gleamed under soft chandelier light, velvet chairs lined up in perfect rows. It was the kind of place that swallowed sound, except for the laughter echoing from the table where my family had already gathered. They looked like they were posing for a magazine spread, perfect clothes, perfect smiles, perfect at pretending I wasn't there. A hostess led me down the aisle between tables. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step sounding louder than it should. She stopped at the far end of the table, where one lonely chair waited. I could feel the distance like a wall, my mother in the center, my siblings clustered around her, and me at the end like a footnote. I smoothed my dress and sat down. The leather felt cold against my skin. Conversation drifted past me as if I were invisible. My brother was telling a story about his new house in River Oaks, my sister showing off her diamond bracelet. They toasted each other with glasses of Bordeaux. No one looked my way. I tried to anchor myself by studying the little details, the flicker of candlelight, the smell of rosemary on the steaks, the muted hum of a jazz song overhead. I thought maybe tonight would be different. Maybe someone would ask about my new project, my new apartment, anything, but even the waiters seemed unsure if I belonged. One of them bent toward me, his voice polite but confused. "Excuse me, are you with this party?" "Yes," I said softly. "I'm with them." The waiter's eyebrows lifted a fraction before he walked away. My mother kept her eyes fixed on her wine. I watched her lift the glass, admired how steady her hand stayed even as she ignored me. Minutes passed like that, conversations circling around me, laughter skipping over me like stones on water. I reached for my napkin and folded it, then unfolded it, a nervous habit. I wondered if they saw me fidgeting. Probably not. Then my mother rose slightly in her chair, glass raised high. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. Her voice had the kind of brightness that made people lean in. "To family." Everyone lifted their glasses. I did too, even though no one turned to clink with me. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give to someone you love. "You know," she said, looking directly at me for the first time all evening, "we've all been thinking." She let the sentence hang, savoring the attention. "Since you're the adopted one," her voice sharpened, "you can pick up the tab tonight. $7,500 should cover it, right?" The room went silent for half a heartbeat. Then laughter erupted around the table, loud and hard. My brother slapped the table. My sister leaned back, cackling. Even two waiters at the bar turned their heads, trying not to stare. Her words hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. I felt my pulse climb up into my ears. $7,500, adopted one. The words clanged together like knives against glass. I wanted to say something, anything. I wanted to stand up, tell them about the nights I worked double shifts to pay for their emergencies, the times I drove 3 hours to pick someone up when their car broke down, the money I sent without being asked. But my throat locked. I looked down at my plate, hands gripping the napkin so tightly it wrinkled like paper. The laughter rolled on, ugly and sharp. My mother sipped her wine as if she hadn't just carved me open in front of strangers. I sat very still. I made my face blank. Silence was all I had left to protect myself. Inside, my thoughts ran fast and hard. Don't give them what they want. Don't let them see you break. I folded the napkin again, slower this time, a small ritual to keep my hands steady. Their voices blurred into a single sound, a rush in my ears. I thought of how many times I'd promised myself I'd stop coming to these dinners, how many times I'd hoped for something different. They thought they'd buried me under their laughter. They didn't know that while I sat there, staring at my plate, I was already planning how to stand back up. Their laughter didn't stop when I stopped hearing it. It echoed, not just in the room, but in my chest, like a ripple you can't calm. I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes stayed fixed on my plate while my body went still, holding everything in. I was trying not to fall apart right there, under chandelier light and forced smiles. My mother kept talking, sipping her wine like she'd just delivered the punchline of the night. Her expression, so polished, so pleased with herself, told me everything I needed to know. That wasn't a slip. That was intentional. That was strategy. I stared at my napkin again, my fingers folding the corners tightly, like they could fold my rage down into something smaller. My throat burned, but I didn't dare open my mouth, and then, without warning, I was 15 again. It was the year they hired a photographer for the family Christmas card. Everyone had matching sweaters, even the dog. I'd bought my own because no one remembered to order one in my size. We stood outside the estate in front of the fountain. It was cold, but no one wanted to complain while the photographer adjusted his lens. My brothers lined up with our dad, my sisters with Mom. I stepped forward, waiting for my cue. Then Claudette waved a hand toward me like brushing lint off her coat. "Sweetie, just let the others take this one first. We don't want to crowd the frame." Crowd the frame. I remember stepping back, off to the side. I didn't argue. I smiled like I understood. I even clapped when they finished posing. 2 weeks later, the cards were printed. 100 glossy envelopes stacked on the hall table. I pulled one open, eager to see myself among them. But there I wasn't. Just the perfect 6. Mother, father, siblings, dog front and center. No me, not even on the back where everyone's names were printed in cursive gold. That moment burned a scar into me. One that still stings when I see Christmas lights. Back in the present, I blinked hard, pushing that memory down where it couldn't paralyze me. The room was still thick with laughter, now gentler as the conversation moved on. I lifted my water glass but set it back down. My hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. Across the table, Mr. Hall, one of my mother's oldest friends, maybe mid-60s with a gut full of prime rib and red wine, leaned in and said loudly, "So, Rhiannon, what role do you play in the family investments these days?" His tone was innocent enough, curious, not cruel. I opened my mouth to answer, grateful for the chance to at least say something about myself. But before I could speak, Claudette cut in smoothly. "Oh, she doesn't really do anything important. She signs checks sometimes. She's adopted, you know." The words snapped through the air again, this time sharper, like a slap that stung more the second time because you saw it coming. Someone chuckled. I couldn't tell who. Maybe my brother. Or my sister, the one who'd once borrowed money from me and never brought it up again. Mr. Hall blinked, awkward now, like he'd stepped into something he hadn't meant to. He tried to recover with a polite smile. Well, it's always good to be included in some way." I wanted to scream. Not out loud, but inward. At the years, the dinners, the endless forgiveness I kept handing out like coupons. Instead, I picked up my wine glass, letting the stem rest between my fingers. I stared at the deep red swirl inside, letting it become something to focus on. They thought this was normal. They thought diminishing me in public was acceptable because it had always been. But this time, I wasn't just absorbing it. I wasn't going to fold. I whispered, barely loud enough to hear myself. "One day, this table will see me differently. Not because they'll change, but because I will." That thought stayed with me as I swirled the wine in my glass, letting the ruby liquid catch the candlelight like it could distract me from everything around me. It didn't. The laughter at the table had faded into background noise. Now it was business talk, Numbers, land deals, expansion plans. My siblings had moved on like nothing ever happened, like my humiliation was a scheduled intermission in their perfectly curated dinner show. I listened quietly, not because I wanted to, but because I knew how to read between their lines. Garrett, the eldest, leaned back in his chair with that smug tone he always used when he thought he sounded like a CEO. "We closed the bid last Thursday. Full acquisition. The firm finalized all name changes already." Name changes. My ears perked up. Leona, sitting across from me with her wine glass balanced perfectly between two manicured fingers, chimed in, "Yeah, everything's cleaned up now. We only left names on the ownership docs that have real skin in the game." I froze. That phrase, it hit me harder than my mother's toast. Real skin in the game. I had been one of the initial signatories. I knew those papers, inside and out. 2 months ago, I reviewed a shareholder amendment with our legal team in Dallas. My name had been there. Clear. Permanent. But now, cleaned up? Name changes? I looked over at Garrett, searching his face for a crack in the armor. He didn't even glance at me. I was invisible. Again, I forced myself to breathe slowly. I replayed that line in my head. The firm finalized all name changes. There was only one reason they'd talk about name changes like that. They'd wiped me out. Quietly. No confrontation, no email, just erased. That wasn't an accident. It was a decision. I hadn't even seen the paperwork. Not a whisper from legal. Which meant someone had intercepted the trail. Redirected updates. Blocked access. Someone close. Someone deliberate. I put my glass down slowly. My hand trembled slightly, but I tucked it under the table, pressing my palm against my thigh to still it. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being erased. Emotionally? Sure. That had been happening since I was 8. But legally? Now that was new. That was war. Claudette didn't notice me watching. She was too busy soaking in the spotlight like always, retelling some story about a dinner she had with a senator last month. My siblings leaned in like disciples at a sermon, all nods and giggles. And then came Leona. Her voice cut through the hum of the room like a fork scraping porcelain. "Honestly, Rhiannon," she said, tilting her head toward me with mock sweetness, "you should be grateful we ever let you in the house growing up." A few chuckles followed. Someone even muttered, "That's cold," but with a smirk, not concern. Grateful. Let me in the house. I remember sleeping on the floor of the guest room for a year because they didn't want to move any furniture for me. I remember being told not to touch the good towels because they were for real family. But yes, sure, I should have sent a thank you card for being allowed through the front door. Leona's smile stayed fixed, too perfect, too smug. I met her gaze and gave a slight nod, not agreement, not surrender, just acknowledgement, because now I knew this wasn't passive aggression anymore. This was a plan. I could feel my nails digging into my palm under the table, sharp, clean pain, better than crying. I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I knew silence would scare them more. That was the night I realized my erasure wasn't an accident, it was a plan. And like every carefully planned move in this family, it had been executed with smiles, clinking glasses, and laughter thick enough to drown in. I stayed still. Even as the noise grew around me, I sat locked in place, not from fear, but calculation. I scanned each face, each smug grin that danced behind wine glasses and expensive jewelry. They thought they'd won. That's what made them so loud. I shifted my gaze down, tracing the edges of the cloth napkin folded perfectly on my lap. Pure white. Immaculate. The kind that doesn't hide stains well. Claudette leaned closer to the server, her voice honeyed with intoxication and fake charm. "Darling, Could I get another glass of the Cabernet? Actually, make it two. One for me and one for my dear daughter, she said, stressing dear like it was a joke, only she understood. The waiter poured the wine, and Claudette didn't miss a beat. As he stepped away, she reached across the table with one of the glasses, pretending to pass it to me. Her hand slipped. The deep red wine cascaded over the edge of the glass, spilling directly onto my lap. No accident, no doubt. It bled into the white napkin like it had been waiting for that moment its whole life. Gasps flickered across the table like someone had dropped a secret. A few soft laughs followed, but the worst of it was Claudette's face. Calm, almost pleased. She tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Oh my," she said with a breathy chuckle. "I guess some things just don't wash out." There it was again, another message wrapped in fake manners. Some things don't wash out, like being adopted, like being unwelcome, like not being blood. I could feel the warmth of the wine soaking into the fabric, seeping through to my skin, but I didn't flinch, not an inch. Aunt Marie leaned over to Claudette, laughing behind her manicured hand. "Well," she said, loud enough for half the table to hear, "it's not like she ever belonged in the first place." My stomach clenched. The laughter that followed was sharper now, hungrier. They'd started the evening toying with me like a chew toy they thought I wouldn't bite back. But now they were bloodletting, and they were enjoying it. I looked at the napkin again, the red spreading wider. It looked like a wound, not mine, hers, theirs. It was the stain they'd tried to press into me my whole life. But for the first time, I saw it for what it was. Projection. Insecurity disguised as power. And I'd been swallowing it for years, thinking it made me small. Not anymore. I gently lifted the napkin from my lap and folded it in half, the stain hidden between the crease. I placed it on the table with careful hands. I looked up. Leona caught my eye, just long enough to smirk. "You're awful quiet tonight," she said. "Cat got your tongue, or just grateful we ever let you through the front door?" More laughter. That one hit different, not because of the words, but because of how effortlessly she said them. Like she was just stating a fact. Like she'd been holding that one in for years and finally let it loose, knowing no one at the table would object. I turned to her slowly and smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough to unnerve her. "Gratitude," I said, "is funny. It only works when it's mutual." She blinked, caught off guard. Before she could answer, I lifted my wine glass, untouched until now, and swirled the dark liquid gently. Its movement reminded me of how quickly things can turn, how fast stability can collapse when the foundation isn't real. They thought the stain would shame me. They didn't know it would mark the beginning of their undoing. The deeper the stain, the clearer I saw who they truly were. And once I saw it, truly saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The laughter around the table was still echoing faintly when the waiter brought out espresso cups and a crystal tray of brandy. The air had thickened, not just from the food and liquor, but from the smugness that floated like perfume off every polished plate and painted face. I stared at the red stain spreading across my napkin like a slow bleeding wound. Nobody else noticed. Or maybe they did. And that was the point. I blinked slowly, willing myself not to react. The weight of the room settled into my chest like wet wool, familiar, oppressive, and damn near suffocating. As forks clinked and spoons stirred, my eyes drifted to the end of the table where Claudette was laughing with Aunt Meredith about something she'd seen on TV. The way her head tilted back with every giggle, it was rehearsed, controlled. She wasn't just enjoying herself. She was enjoying my humiliation, and I was quietly calculating. My fingers traced the edge of my purse under the table. I knew exactly how much was in my checking account. I knew the balance on my credit cards. I knew that if I wanted to, I could pull out my Amex, hand it over with a polite smile, and pay the damn $7,500 bill just to end the night, just to be done. The thought made my stomach turn. But I kept going down that road in my mind anyway. What if I just paid? Maybe then they'd stop. Maybe they'd nod and move on. Maybe I could gather what was left of my pride and leave this wretched dinner behind. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to make it to tomorrow. If I just pay, I whispered silently to myself, maybe I get to leave with a shred of dignity. But even as I told myself that lie, I knew it wasn't true, because that's what I'd done for years. Bit my tongue, smiled, paid, in all kinds of ways, with my silence, my pride, my peace. And each time, it only made them stronger. I could feel my fingers sliding toward the zipper on my purse again, like muscle memory. I'd done this before, too many times. But just as I was about to reach in, I felt it, eyes on me. My head turned slightly, and there he was, Grandpa Orville. He hadn't said much all night, just sipped his coffee quietly, occasionally nodding or raising his eyebrows at the nonsense around him. He looked older tonight, tired, but not blind. His eyes locked on mine. It wasn't pity in his gaze. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. And then, subtle, slow, he shook his head. Just once. No. That's what it meant. Just, no. Not this time. It was the smallest gesture. If I had blinked, I might have missed it. But it landed in me like a lightning strike. I let go of the purse. My hand drifted back to my lap, slow and deliberate. My shoulders straightened without me even thinking about it. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel entirely alone. The conversations around me continued. Someone joked about real estate in Aspen. Someone else laughed about a cousin's DUI like it was comedy gold. Claudette clinked her glass and whispered something to Leona, who snorted into her coffee. But I sat still and breathing. Because something had shifted. Something small, yes, but real. I wasn't going to pay. Not this time. Not in money. Not in shame. Not in silence. Let them talk. Let them sip and smirk and pretend their cruelty made them powerful. The game was changing. They just didn't know it yet. And in that fragile moment of hope, I found the strength to see the night through. The clatter of silverware had softened. The laughter had grown thinner, more tired. Dessert plates were mostly empty, and the smell of crème brûlée lingered faintly beneath the sting of spilled wine. The room had quieted just enough to feel the weight of what hadn't been said, what was still coming. The servers were starting to clear plates, moving with that end-of-night energy, efficient but detached, like they knew the theater was ending and the curtains were about to fall. One of them leaned over to refill a coffee cup near me, but didn't even glance in my direction. I had become invisible again. Or maybe I always was. I sat still, hands folded loosely in my lap, watching the way the napkin on my plate, stained deep red, looked like a wound that wouldn't clot. It was just linen, just wine. But in that moment, it felt like something had broken open and wouldn't close again. Across the table, my siblings laughed about their ski trip in Vail. Leona boasted about the villa her husband had just purchased in France. Not for living, just for investment, she said casually, as if that clarified anything. Jordan chimed in with a story about buying a watch that cost more than my first year of law school. None of it surprised me anymore. They talked like royalty who forgot what it meant to work for anything. And yet here I sat. A woman with degrees, accolades, a career, a house of my own. Still treated like I'd borrowed my seat at the table, like I had to prove my worth with every breath. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my fingers, and I waited. Because I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Then Claudette spoke. She leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and practiced, sharp enough to cut through conversation. "You know, Rhiannon," she began, with that smooth tone she used when she was about to say something awful and call it concern. "I've always told people you turned out surprisingly okay, considering where you came from." The table chuckled. "But let's not kid ourselves," she continued, louder now. "You're only here because of our generosity. You were charity, sweetheart, a rescue mission. We didn't have to keep you." But we did. Silence. Even the waiter clearing dishes hesitated, mid-reach. It landed like a slap. No one looked at me. Not directly. They shifted in their seats, adjusted napkins, glanced at the chandelier like it had something to say. For a moment, I felt the old reflex rise in me. Shrink. Swallow. Numb myself to the insult. Let it pass. Smile politely. Say thank you. But something in me refused this time. I set my glass down, slow and steady. Then I lifted my eyes to meet hers. The smug look on her face didn't waver at first. She expected the usual silence. She thought she'd won again. "Be careful, Mother," I said quietly, voice even but unshaking. "You may think I am silent because I am weak. But silence has its own power." Her smile faltered. The air at the table shifted, just slightly, but enough to notice. You could feel it in the way no one reached for their coffee anymore, in the sudden stillness that always follows when someone realizes the rules might be changing. Claudette's lips pressed into a tight line. Her eyes narrowed, scanning me like she was trying to figure out if I'd just declared war. And maybe I had, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream or cry or flip the table like some dramatic soap opera. I just looked at her like I had finally seen her clearly, because I had. All the years of biting my tongue, of letting her rewrite the story, erase the parts of me she didn't like. Those years were over. Her mouth opened like she wanted to reply, but nothing came. The rest of the table sat in quiet discomfort, not out of loyalty to her, but because they couldn't quite believe I had spoken at all. And I didn't say anything else. I just turned slightly, looking down the table, letting the silence stretch, letting it do the work. For the first time in years, it wasn't mine to carry alone. I could feel the weight of my grandfather's gaze on me, even as the clinking of coffee cups filled the silence. That small, silent moment of support was enough to steady my breath. It didn't make the room warmer, but it gave me a center to stand on while the storm gathered again. The servers had begun clearing plates more quickly now. The candles on the table had burned down low, their glow unflattering and dim. I could see the staff glancing at the clock, anxious to end the shift, but no one dared approach our table yet. The tension was obvious, even to strangers. I straightened slightly, my back against the velvet chair. Around me, the conversation about vacations and jewelry had faded into muted whispers. Claudette sat across from me, her expression polished but brittle, like porcelain under a hairline crack. She'd never been good at hiding her anger. I knew the silence she was building wasn't peace. It was preparation. She made her move with a practiced smile. "Since we're being honest tonight," she said brightly, sliding a slim leather folder from her handbag, "I think it's time everyone here knows what's really been going on." I felt the eyes around the table swing toward me before she even opened it. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Claudette drew out a stack of papers and fanned them like playing cards. "For years, we've trusted Rhiannon to manage certain family funds," she said, her voice carrying to the far end of the table. "And look what I've found." She held up a page with highlighted sections, numbers circled in red ink. Tens of thousands misallocated, withdrawals with no receipts, transfers to accounts we've never heard of. She shook her head with mock sadness. "It breaks my heart, but it's all right here." Gasps, murmurs. Leona leaned forward, eyes alight with the kind of satisfaction you only see in someone who's been waiting for blood. "I knew it," she said softly. "I always said she was too quiet to be trustworthy." Jordan nodded. We work hard for this family, and she's been bleeding it dry. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The papers were clean, crisp, too perfect. I recognized the format. I'd designed it myself for legitimate reports years ago. But these numbers were not mine. They were fabrications, probably easy to plant, but harder to refute at midnight over coffee. Claudette spread them across the table, letting the others lean in, murmur, point. We took you in, she said, the veneer slipping, voice sharper now. And this is how you repay us? You've always been a taker, Rhiannon. Always. My fingers curled around the edge of the tablecloth. I felt the warmth drain from my face, but kept my eyes steady. I had rehearsed this moment for years without knowing it. Leona's laugh rang out, thin and brittle. Be grateful we ever let you in the house at all, she said. You don't deserve a seat at this table. The words landed heavier than the papers. I scanned their faces, my brothers and sisters, people who had shared birthdays, holidays, a roof. Their whispers swelled like a tide pulling back from shore, ready to crash over me. They wanted me to drown in it, to flail, to break. I didn't. I sat back slowly, hands folding in my lap. Not because I had no defense, but because I knew this wasn't the moment to fight with facts. Facts don't matter when the mob is hungry. The waiters had stopped clearing dishes entirely now. One of them, a young man near the corner, stood frozen with a stack of dessert plates in his hands, watching like it was a play. He looked at me for a second, then looked away. I reached for my water, lifted it to my lips, and took a slow drink. I could feel their eyes trying to pull me into the fight, to make me defend myself and fail. Instead, I let silence settle over me like armor. Let them think I was cornered. Let them think this was victory. They mistook my silence for defeat, but it was the quiet before the storm. The laughter continued, brittle and clumsy now, like it couldn't decide whether to gloat or tremble. I stayed still, letting the moment breathe. My eyes stayed down, fixed on the napkin beside my plate. Still stained, the red wine having bled into the linen like it was ink on a forgotten page. Let them keep talking, I told myself. Let them exhaust themselves on the fantasy they've built. Leona was halfway through another jab when it happened. A sharp crack split the room, the sound of a palm slamming down hard against the wood of the table. Every fork froze midair, every voice caught in its throat. Even the clinking from the kitchen died behind the swinging doors. I looked up. So did they. At the head of the table, my grandfather Orville slowly lowered his hand. His eyes, usually soft, tired from age, were as clear and cold as winter glass. Enough, he said, the word clean and flat, no louder than necessary, but impossible to ignore. Claudette blinked, caught mid-sentence. Dad, Don't, he said, and the word landed harder than his hand had. You've all had your fun tonight. Your jokes, your lies, but this humiliation ends now. The silence deepened. It wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. You could feel the weight of it pressing against your chest. I didn't move, neither did Orville. He reached beside his chair and brought out a worn leather envelope. Slowly, deliberately, he laid it on the table in front of him. This, he said, is the last piece of business I'll ever conduct at a dinner like this. Leona let out a confused, nervous laugh. What is that? Another accusation? He turned his gaze to her and I saw her flinch for the first time all night. No, it's a reallocation, he said, of the estate, of the company, of the fortune. Claudette leaned forward, voice clipped and forced. Orville, please, this isn't the time. He ignored her. You all sat here, watched your sister be slandered, mocked, insulted. Some of you joined in. None of you defended her. Because she... Claudette started again. He held up a hand. Be quiet. That was when it changed. His words were no longer an old man's disappointment. They were law. Effective immediately, Every one of you who participated in tonight's disgrace will receive nothing. Not a dollar, not a share, not a seat at the table. It was like someone had dropped a bomb and the air hadn't caught up yet. $9 billion. That was the value of the family estate. Old oil money, land, stock in a dozen companies. We never talked about it aloud. It just was. A shadow that followed our name. "You can't be serious," Leona whispered. "You're bluffing." "You think I got to 93 years old bluffing?" he snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard him. "I've watched this family rot from the inside, and I thought maybe time would fix it. But I was wrong. So I'm fixing it now." Claudette's face drained of color. "You can't disinherit your own children over one bad night." Orville looked at her, long and flat and full of something that felt older than anger. "This wasn't one night," he said. "This was every selfish choice, every lie, every cruel laugh stacked on top of the next. Tonight just made it visible." Jordan muttered something under his breath, maybe a curse, maybe a plea. Someone else stood up and sat right back down. The silence was thick, awkward, stunned. No one looked at me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He wasn't doing this because I asked. I had asked for nothing. He was doing this because I endured. Orville finally turned his eyes to me. "Rhiannon," he said, softly now. "You'll find revised documents on your desk by morning." He didn't say what they were. He didn't have to. Across the table, Claudette's mouth was still open, but no words came out. Leona looked like she'd been slapped. "She doesn't deserve it," she said quietly, to no one in particular. Orville didn't even look her way. He stood slowly, the leather chair creaking under his weight. "To the rest of you," he said, "I hope tonight stays with you. I hope the sound of your laughter haunts you. I hope you finally understand what it cost." He didn't wait for their reactions. He just walked out. No cane, no help. Just that slow, steady walk of someone who had nothing left to say. The restaurant didn't move. Not the servers, not the diners, not us. I sat there another moment, breathing, not smiling, not crying, just still. They had taken everything they thought mattered from me, and now it was their turn to lose everything. But even in the wreckage, some people just don't know when to stop. Claudette jolted up from her chair, as if yanked by invisible strings. Her voice cracked, desperate, nothing like the cool, clipped woman who'd cut me down for decades. "Dad, wait, please." She reached for Orville's arm as he moved toward the door. "You can't actually mean this. You're upset, but this is extreme. We're your children." Her voice echoed across the emptying steakhouse, more dramatic than sincere. The other tables had been cleared, lights dimmed. Only our table remained fully lit and painfully exposed. "Children," he repeated flatly, not turning back. "You think that word gives you rights? What have you earned tonight?" Leona stood halfway, half defensive, half confused. "It's not like we meant for it to go that far." "Oh, you meant it," Orville said without hesitation. "You just didn't think there would ever be consequences." Claudette spun toward me now, her last card. "You think she's innocent? She's not even one of us. You all forget. She's adopted. She doesn't belong at this table, let alone in charge of the family legacy." Her words slapped across the room like a gust of bitter wind. I stayed seated, unmoved. There was no surprise left in me for the cruelty she could reach for. But it still cut somewhere deeper, not because it hurt, but because it used to. My siblings didn't leap to join her this time. They shifted uncomfortably. Jordan glanced at the floor. Leona's mouth opened, then closed. The storm had shifted directions, and they felt it in their bones. Orville turned, slowly, and pulled out one last folder from inside his coat. He placed it gently on the table. No slam this time. He opened it with the same deliberate calm one might use to read a will aloud. "This," he said, "is not new. It was signed, sealed, and notarized 2 weeks ago, long before this dinner. Everything that changed tonight was already in motion. You just gave it a stage." Claudette's knees gave out as if his words carried physical weight. She collapsed into her seat with a dull thud, mouth slightly open, fingers trembling. "No," she whispered. "Yes," Orville replied without venom. "You saw a quiet girl and assumed silence meant weakness, but I've watched her carry more than any of you ever have." The only sound after that was the hum of the ceiling vent and the occasional clink of flatware as waiters slowly, respectfully, resumed clearing plates. I looked down. There, by my hand, still lay the stained napkin, the one I'd clutched in shame just an hour earlier. I picked it up. The red blotch had faded slightly, dried into the fabric like an old bruise. I smoothed it out on my lap with one hand, folded it slowly, once, then again, and laid it neatly beside my plate. Not discarded. Not torn, just set down. The shame was never mine to carry, and now it no longer would be. I stood slowly. My chair gave a soft creak, and every eye at the table rose to meet mine, some resentful, some stunned, a few still scrambling to find footing in a conversation that had ended long before they realized it. I didn't raise my voice. "I never needed your approval," I said, clear and quiet. "Only my own peace." I reached for my purse, pulled out my wallet, and placed a folded bill beside my untouched dessert plate. I paid for my meal, no more, no less. Not because I owed anyone here a dime, but because I was walking out clean. One of the servers, young, no more than 20, watched me as I walked past. He didn't say anything, but he gave a small nod. Not pity, not surprise. Respect. As the heavy doors swung open behind me, the sound of them settling shut was the only applause I needed. Narration. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And in that silence they heard it louder than ever.